I was going to ask, what's the weather like? Because it's here.
Oh, I got almost too much sun yesterday. All right. Well, today I'm super excited to have Karin Larsen on, and I was very fortunate to have you as my broadcasting partner, my first ever, and hopefully more to come, Olympic experiences as a commentator or on-air analyst, I guess. And for people that are unaware, if they live under a rock, your resume kind of like fills a page. So I'll look at my notes to mention some of the things, but a world champion in what they used to call synchronized swimming, I think they now call artistic swimming.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. So 86 world champion, Olympic team member in 88, I believe.
Right.
And then you got the best sportscaster in Vancouver, the Leo Award in 1999, 2001 BC Swimming Hall of Fame, 2019 Coquitlam Hall of Fame, 2021 BC Sports Hall of Fame. Your news reporter and sports reporter for CBC. You've been covering, I don't know, is it 9 Olympics that you've done now? 8, 9?
Yeah, it's up there. I think it's 10, 11. There's some Paralympics in there as well. So yeah,
right.
Quite a few. Yeah.
Right. And then you also got to cover your sister winning Olympic silver medal in 96 in Atlanta. So, and I think that was with Steve Armitage, if I'm correct.
Yes, that was one of my very first that was my very first Olympics as a broadcaster. So it was fantastic and also very weird, right?
Right. And yeah. for people that might not immediately recognize the name Steve Armitage, look him up. And if you hear his voice, you will immediately recognize it. It's like one of the voices of Canadian sports. Just an absolute iconic voice, let alone like what he's covered. Like you hear his voice and you just think sports broadcasting, and then what he's got to cover is pretty incredible.
And you're speaking from personal experience on that little anecdote, aren't you, Josh?
Right. Yeah. Like growing up hearing him, you turn on hockey, you don't really think about it. And then you just hear that voice, and then meeting him in person. I was very fortunate to be introduced to him and by yourself. And then just hearing that voice in person is like, it's special.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I really loved is with any job, no matter how much you love it, no matter what the job is, sometimes any work can sort of wear you down and people can lose some of their passion for it or whatever, I guess. And one thing that was awesome to me was when we were there, the women's, I don't remember what number it was, 6s or 8s in rowing.
Oh, the women's 8s, yeah.
The women's 8s when they won the gold
Tokyo.
medal.
Yeah. And
it wasn't necessarily an expected result. And I was just sitting in the prepping area when Steve came out, and he was glowing. Like he was so excited to have got to call that gold medal for Canada. And it was so nice to see, like, after however many games he's called, that he was so excited to call that Olympic gold medal. It was pretty awesome to see that passion, like, still there.
Yeah, I'm always impressed by sportscasters who do the big time, which is Hockey Night in Canada, and do that for a number of years, but also come to Olympic sport where you and I grew up and have an equal amount of excitement and passion for Olympic sport as well. Like, hockey's the big show in this country when it comes to broadcasting. Right. But a guy like Steve, when he brings that, it just makes, I don't know, it's what it deserves, right? The big time treatment, the big time voice, the big time guy.
Right. Yeah. Totally awesome. The other one, I swear I'm terrible. Whenever I start speaking to someone, I forget the name that I'm looking for, but baseball commentator for the Toronto Blue Jays.
Oh, Dan Schulman.
Dan Schulman.
Basketball. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Loves basketball. For people that don't know, he like loves basketball, but he's like the voice of baseball for everyone, like it doesn't matter if you turn on Fox or ESPN. I swear I just hear him all the time. And he has another one of those just incredible voices, and also is like such a genuinely nice person.
Yeah.
Just loves sports, loves talking basketball. And
those guys with the great pipes, a really good instrument. I mean, those are two of our country's best sports broadcasters, but they sort of bring a gravitas to the whole thing as well. Right. It's instantly legitimate as soon as they open their mouth.
Right. Yeah. It's incredible. And then the thing that's sort of amazing about getting to broadcast or report is that it's a much longer career than your athletic career, as you're obviously well aware. Our athletic careers are so brief, and the impact that you have compared to a coaching career or a broadcasting career, which can be pushed for so long, because obviously your voice can can last a lot longer than your physical capabilities at the highest level.
Yeah,
so
that's interesting. I mean, but that's hard for people getting out of sport though too. I know it was very difficult for me to make that transition because your career in sport is relatively short and extremely intense.
Yeah.
Pretty much takes up all your time and brain power if you're competing internationally, and then it's like it's over, and it's like, wow, what now?
Right.
if you're not a good planner, like I wasn't.
This episode is brought to you by Bear and Ground Coffee. Started in 2017 in Yellowknife, they focus on delicious blends of coffee from all over the world and now ship anywhere in Canada. They support numerous events and causes and not only deliver a great product, but prioritize staff health and well-being. Go out and get some of their coffee if you haven't already.
But I think the more and more people that I speak to, in judo, we have that vibe. So in judo, there's all these judoka, and then sometimes they move in, but it feels like this void to fill. So when you grow up chasing high performance in a sport, you're often isolated to the sport, and which isn't bad. Like you get to know that community so well, and you get really strong ties, but it's sometimes hard to have a reference of the lens of the rest of the world of other sports. And the more that I speak to other people, like I had a recent conversation with Paul Duerden, who is like the greatest Canadian volleyball player ever and was the best volleyball player in the world. Also just a genuinely great guy. Same thing. He said that his wife even told him that for years after he was like a shell. And just, you feel so lost. And like when your self-worth is so connected to what you're trying to achieve, that when that ends, it's very hard to sort of find your place again, because every aspect of you is connected to that. What people know me as outside of the sport, that's what I am. And so it feels like life is sort of getting reset. Like I can imagine people when they retire from their regular jobs, when they're later in life, where they might feel that way, but it's weird because you might be 25 or you might be 30 or you might be 35. Like you're so young and you feel totally lost.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think too, even though you can be mentally aware that that's a change that's coming, to actually go through it is very different. And when you live in sport and you live in, I mean, I grew up in a smallish sport, right? Synchronized swimming. And I think judo is there's probably 2 degrees of separation between everyone in the judo community across Canada, right? So you live in this sort of world where you have a shorthand because everyone knows what you're talking about. You're all sort of aware of the same things. It's a bit, I don't know, is it clubby the right word?
Right.
And then to venture outside of that, where you don't have all those reference points, and that level of expertise can be very intimidating to change your, and I remember thinking when I left sport and I was still trying to finish university, okay, I'll just spend the same amount of hours in school or on my schoolwork as I was on my sport, which, it was a good idea, a good thought, but was very hard to do actually. Right. Yeah, because it's not that thing. It's not the thing that's motivating you. It's not that thing that you're passionate about. It's not that thing where you have this, massive goal at the end that you're working towards. And all the people around you are also supporting you as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a funny thing. The one thing to that, like, I think also if we focused on some of those other aspects, like we did our sport, that might be a little crazy making as well. Like the connection to high performance sport and health is an interesting one to me. I'm definitely not saying people shouldn't do it. I definitely believe it's not for everyone. And I don't think it's necessarily a healthy lifestyle. So the fact that at some point it ends is probably better for people, especially mentally, because the amount of pressure that you put on yourself, the lack of sleep you get because you're obsessing over the smallest detail and how you can get better, probably isn't something that's sustainable throughout your whole life. So finding some kind of balance in the transition after is probably important. But the one thing that's really powerful that I find that's a commonplace now, obviously there's exceptions to every rule, but many, many, many people that I know that have legitimately made a hard push to become high performance athletes, whether they reached all of their goals or some of their goals or not as many of the goals as they'd like, when that was sustained for a number of years, their transition, while difficult at times, is often quite successful. Like the amount of people that are highly successful in terms of reporting or building a club or coaching or like that, that innate work ethic that you've honed for so many years seems to transition very well to when they do find their next passion. It might not be sport, or it might be sport in a different way, but that often translates to very successful careers, I find.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it sometimes, I'm very critical of myself in doing stories and writing and reporting and doing my job, but just that sense of, I don't know how think of a move, Josh, that you had to do 1,000, 10,000 times before you got it right. Like in synchronized swimming, they're so precision oriented, and so like nothing was ever perfect ever. You know, you're just sort of striving for this ideal that you could just never get to. And you know, a lot of repetition and a lot of just trying to hone even the finest little, I don't know, angle or whatever it was at the time. And I think that was actually a bit detrimental for me when I moved into what I call my career. Just like really should have been a little bit easier on myself, and you know, for my own mental health too, just understanding, you know, that you're not going to be really good right away, right? Like you need to sort of develop those skills the way you have other, maybe the skills you did during your sport. I don't know. I don't know how that was for you. I moved out of my sport. I made a conscious effort, even though I did do some coaching, to step away, and that was probably a wise decision. And yet, still work in the, you know, in the sector of sport, right?
Right. Yeah. I wonder sometimes if, because it's such a common trait, like the term perfectionist, like people wanting things to be perfect, doesn't mean that you actually perfect everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
good point.
that idea that what you're chasing being a perfectionist, I don't know if it's that trait is created by your ambition and your motivation and your passion for a sport, or if it's that so many people that are perfectionists are of the personality trait to want to chase high performance because of that. Yeah. Like, I don't know if it's a chicken and the egg situation, because it's like, you know, it's so common that you talk to those people and they're like, that personality is that they're perfectionists. Maybe that's why they chase that. And maybe that's the challenge that you're trying to overcome all the time, is to not be so brutally hard on yourself. It could be that that's our personality trait and that's what drove us in that direction, or it could have created it in us, or who knows, maybe some combination of the other. But it is such a common thing. Like, I'm that way. It's like you do something and then you're like, it's not perfect. So then you're like, should I even do it at all? Like, is it even worth my effort at all? Should I just scrap it and throw it away?
Yeah. That's a horrible little spiral to get into.
Right. It's terrible. Yeah. It's why I find little quotes or quirks or whatever, or things that I read that I try to hold on to give me some of that balance. I believe it's the person that started LinkedIn. He said, if you're not embarrassed by the first attempt at doing something, then you started too late. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So I sort of like the idea of that, because then I can accept myself screwing up or not doing something perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. We all have to be a little bit kinder with ourselves, I think.
Right. It's an insane standard that you cannot live up to. So you're guaranteed to fail. And then you're dealing with this failure, which as a perfectionist, you never want. You know, it just plays in itself. Like,
but that's where sport is so good, actually, because I wouldn't have ever said this when I was in my 20s. So I left sport when I was 25. But that you are in this little crucible where you can be sort of that obsessive about, you know, something and really push yourself and strive for it, because it is as important as it is when you're in it. It's just sport ultimately, right? Like, and if you realize that you have a finite career, especially in a small sport where you're never going to make any money, you know, it's a sport career. It's not a money-making career. You can sort of keep your sanity, I think, ultimately, just by recognizing that, you know, you fail, you succeed within the walls of that sport, right? And there are walls, which are kind of nice, actually. I think sometimes think of it that way.
Right. to that one point that you just made, I didn't know till now. So I stopped competing when I was around 23, 24, and you stopped at 25 with a extensive career at 25. So do you ever look back, because as a world champion and an Olympic athlete, might have been a little different. I think the world of sport is getting a better understanding that your athletic career doesn't have to, you don't have to be LeBron James at 19 to be successful. Like, careers start much later. You look at guys like Jose Bautista that became everyday players at 27 and at 29 are league MVPs. So do you ever, not necessarily with regret, but wonder about how things could have been different? Because 25 is pretty young, especially at the level of success you had to stop in the sport.
Yeah. So two things. I think sport and Olympic sport, when I was leaving, was way different than it was now. I just was the poor athlete for a long time. Even though I had funding, I was living away from home, just enough carding money to sort of pay my bills, have a car. And I worked as a waitress in a bar to fund my swimming career. Because at 24, 25 years old, you don't want the bank of mom and dad still having to pay for everything, right? And when I left, and I had just turned 25, I felt so old, Josh. Right. At 25, I felt so old. And people, it was very rare for anyone to stay in a sport past there, because it was more amateur than it is now. Like, you didn't have sponsors. There weren't money-making opportunities. There, God, the fact that women are, fighting for childcare and maternity leave in sport just sort of blows my mind, because I don't think I knew any athletes who were mothers during their sporting career, whereas now there are quite a few, and fathers as well, right? So they're able to have it as a true career. Now, it's not going to last forever, obviously, but there's more of a continuum. You don't sort of just drop off the edge and it's over for that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. 25 felt really old. My husband, who was a high performance swimmer on the national swim team, he quit at age 22 and he felt old at 22, he says. Right. So that's what it was like in the 80s. It was a little bit different 35 years ago than it is now.
Right. But I mean, to that point, I'll say the same thing. As I stopped competing at around 23, and the exact same thing is I felt old. I felt my body I had a couple injuries in my last year and a half of judo. I had like thumb surgery, and I had a number of surgeries and injuries, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so old. This is a sign that I'm so old. I can't keep doing it. It's insane. It didn't hurt the fact that I was at that point dramatically under what my own mental projection of where I would be is. But nonetheless, you have all those injuries and you just think, oh my God, my body's breaking down. And now I think of a 23-year-old as such a child. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but it's like there's so much more to life at that stage. But I felt like, oh my God, I'm so old. And I always chuckle when people refer to athletes preparing for an Olympics for 4 years. And I always chuckle at that, because as an athlete, like, I was allowed on the mats at 3.5. I was at the dojo before that because my brothers did judo, but at 3.5, I was allowed on the mats. So I stopped at 23. So if, say, in an alternate universe, I qualified for the Olympics, that would have been 20 years of judo before that. So that's the other part, is like, when people are in a high performance level competing nationally or internationally, they've often done it easily for a decade. It's not a quad that you got ready for, maybe in some way, but these are lifetime achievements or lifetime work, to get to that point. So when feeling old at that age is like, because for the last 15 years, I've been doing this 6 days a week and weight training and working. So
I mean, you feel old, and then you come out. I moved back from Calgary to Vancouver, where I grew up, and you reconnect with some friends from high school, and they've bought houses, they're married, they've had, they've really sort of established themselves, and you have a Toyota Tercel to your name, and that's about it. And that's breaking down too, right? And you haven't finished university.
Right. It's also an interesting thing to think about it that way, like where your priorities lie, because it's very different. Like, when you're going that way, contrary to popular belief, most athletes are not thinking about paychecks. They're thinking about competing at the highest level and wanting to have a chance to compete against the best. They're not thinking, this is going to get me a Bentley. because that would be insane to think that.
No, I think most of them are thinking, you know, how can I support myself, live comfortably, maybe, save for the future. I don't know. It's so different in different sports. So you think of someone like Andre DeGrasse, who has lots of sponsors, you know, it's sort of the big timers in the Canadian Olympic sports scene. I think they do okay. But, you know, let me tell you, all those 8 women who won the gold medal in rowing, I'm sure they all have day jobs, or right? Like it's just what your sport, the profile of your sport allows for.
The number of athletes that get that, even if they come from a sporting world where there is that much money. Like you look at American football, how many people play Division I in the NFL? I don't know. It's huge numbers. Of that, how many actually make the NFL? Of that, who lasts more than 3 years? Which is the average length of a player in the NFL. So the amount of people that get these rags to riches financially in sport, even in the big time sports, is a very rare. Like if you look at amateur baseball players, they're some of the least paid workers on the planet. It's like some of the most underpaid people on the planet Earth is like single A baseball players. So there is definitely, you know, the Kevin Gosmans who get over $100 million contracts, but there's a lot of people that are literally living at less than minimum wage salaries is what they're making. It's like, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think about the CFL football players that way sometimes, who are some of the best at their sport in the world, you know, playing in, I guess, what is a second tier league. And wow, like the difference between playing in the CFL and the money you make there versus playing in the NFL and the money you make there. Same game, different countries, obviously different profiles. But it's a razor thin edge, I think, sometimes to get over, over the hump.
It's also amazing how that sport changed so much. I think it was like 1991 where Rocket Ishmael was drafted to the CFL and chose the CFL over the NFL because they were going to pay him more. That was like 91.
Yeah. So who was it? It was Bruce McNall, it was Gretzky, and it was John Candy, right? This is when they had bought the Toronto Argos back then. And this was as much a publicity play as it was. I mean, Rocket Ishmael was a legit fantastic player. It's kind of what you see. What's the name of the new golf league in the Saudi backed, you know, Dustin Johnson going to this,
turning down PGA events.
And for $125 million to go play on this Saudi backed tour. I mean, you know, a curse on Dustin Johnson, but like that's what the CFL was trying to do back when it brought in Rocket Ishmael, right?
And you could say the MLS followed that same thing. They have a really interesting system where they allow so many players that are outside of the salary cap structure, and you brought in people like David Beckham.
Yeah, but they also get the old guys, right? They don't get guys at their prime. They get the names afterwards when they're in the sunset of their career.
Right. That's true. But they have such weight to their name. Like I read a report that supposedly Lionel Messi is looking at going to the MLS when his contract ends in France. Now he's not the Lionel Messi that he was a couple of years ago, but this guy is still pretty top tier. Like that's a pretty wild name to think that they're bringing them there. And I think maybe them being able to stick to that game plan for so long has slowly started to bring in a little more talent at a little bit younger age for MLS, that it's sort of a different world now.
So I think I've got this right, because when Thierry Henry went to, did he go to New York Red Bull, right? Yeah. But he wouldn't play in stadiums that had artificial turf. So it was a big deal when New York Red Bull was coming to Vancouver, because Thierry Henry was going to play, and then he refused to play because BC Place Stadium has terrible turf. So I'm just remembering that story. There was quite a bit of excitement, even though, again, a guy in a sunset of his career, and then he comes down and is like, no, I'm not playing on that concrete. Right. And why would he? It's so damaging.
At that age too.
Yeah. Ouch. And my knees hurt just thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think he won the World Cup with France. He's like an all-timer, like great player. Yeah. I guess to the more niche sport of synchronized swimming, what brought you to that? I don't mean that it's just it. As a person that never got involved in it, also as a person that was always scared I was going to drown when I get into the pool. I can tread water, but it's just like, it's such a niche sport. It also comes across to me as a person that can swim, but not
Yeah.
swim. So physically demanding to be able to perform in that.
Yeah, so it's a pretty straight line. I have 3 sisters. My parents are immigrants from Europe. So my dad's from Denmark, my mom's from Holland. Both of them very sports minded. My dad was a very good athlete, very good rower in Denmark. Comes to Canada in his young 20s, has 4 daughters. He just wanted a soccer player. Ends up having 4 girls, and I'm 58 now. When I was growing up, there was no girls teams for anything. If you were sports minded and wanted to be competitive, it was swimming, I think, and maybe some gymnastics. So my parents ended up joining the YMYWCA in Westminster. We were enrolled in all the programs, and swimming was one of them. And because there was a YWCA there, synchronized swimming background in Canada is a lot through the YWCA programs across the country. And so, we just joined all the things. And that was one of the things I joined. And I ended up having a lot of friends in it. And it's my friends that kept me in. I just sort of went back every year and got pretty good at it.
Yeah, it's funny how same thing, like coming from a judo background, which obviously is very niche. And you think of the 1980s, if you're going to do a martial art, it wouldn't be judo, it'd probably be the Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Karate. But I was in a hometown of 2,700 people. And this guy started working at the Bruce Nuclear Power Station. He had a black belt in judo. So he started teaching at the town hall.
Yeah.
And my oldest brother, who was quite athletic and troublesome in a sense, not that he was bad, but he had a lot of energy at 5 and 6. So he'd get in, he'd try to climb onto the garage roof, like weird things like that. So my parents just put him in every sport that they could.
Yeah.
So to get rid of some of this energy. And for people that don't know about judo is a grappling sport. So wrestling, there's no striking, but lots of wrestling, throwing, things like that. Well, that's natural to lots of kids to enjoy that. So he takes to it, loves it. My mom has 5 kids, so she would just bring us all to the dojo. So every day I see people wrestling and laughing, and so I'm like, oh, I have to do this.
Exactly. So, plus your older brother's in it, and every younger kid wants to do what. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I'm like, I have to do what they're doing. So then, so I naturally go to it. But yeah, it's sort of funny how you find those different niches. There wasn't necessarily anything. I don't know. There wasn't no dojo within an hour of us.
I was going to say free babysitting for your mom. It wasn't free, but it was a break for the parents, right?
Right.
I'm pretty sure that was it for my mom as well. Yeah.
Yeah. She wasn't going to pay daycare or some babysitter to leave me at home when she went to the dojo. So I just came.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started coming from birth to the dojo. Yeah.
And so when did it spark in you that this was something that you were either good at or you really loved, or you... Oh, wait, I'm doing the interviewing now. Anyway.
No, well, I mean, for my own ego, it's sort of nice to hear the question. It's funny because yours probably, it's been so long that you've been doing the job of interviewing people that it's probably easy to fall into that
it is a little
trap, I'll say. But because I think it's sort of funny is, so when I was little, I started going every day, and then I would go when there was judo days. And what I remember really, and my dad actually reminded me of this, my dad who doesn't remember my birthday or how old I am, but remembers this story, is I was about 5.5 or 6. I was horribly sick. I'd never missed a single judo class, and I was really sick. So I fall asleep before judo starts. My family goes to the dojo. My oldest sister stays home with me because I'm so sick. And I wake up while they're still at the dojo and had a meltdown. How can you go without me? Like, I've never missed a class in my life. Like, how can they leave me here? And I remember that still, which is kind of wild, but it's like, I was so in love with the idea of judo that, it was just, I couldn't believe it. And because I started and I was at the dojo so young, I honestly don't remember before. It's like asking someone when they learned how to walk. I've just always done it. This is just like my life. So it's, so it's sort of a funny thing that way. So, I guess the other thing I was interested in is looking back at your career athletically, is if you were to, there's so much that's changed in so long, but I also think we get in the mindset that whatever we're doing now is the best, which isn't necessarily true. Like, we always think everything we do now is so evolved. Oh, we know so much more now. We understand physiology or sports so much better. But when you look at, I saw a commercial or a YouTube video or something where they had the gentleman that won he was an American Olympic champion in the 100 meter. And they had Andre DeGrasse run the race in the comparables on a dirt track with different shoes. And Andre's not used to that equipment, but
I've seen that. Yeah, that's an interesting show, right? I think that there's a whole series of athletes then and now, kind of.
right.
Yeah.
And we love to think that we're the most evolved we've ever been, so we must be doing stuff better now. I don't think that's necessarily true at all. But I guess from your career, like if you could go back, not from a place of regret, but if you're like, there's something that I found later at some point in my life that if I could go back and do that younger or at a different time or focus on that more, do you have anything like that you
I don't think so. Like I became a good athlete out of sheer bloody mindedness and hard work. I have to say that I'm not the most talented person. I barely made the Olympic team, and I went as an alternate in 1988. You know, I was in the top tier in Canada, but never, except for in a team event, you know, of the best there was. And I think I probably maxed out my abilities, just like I say, through sort of sheer bloody mindedness, which is a really good trait to have, I think, in life and a lot of things, and not just in sport, although for other people around you, it can be hard to deal with.
Right.
Things are different now. I think if there's one thing I would do different is I would probably stand up for myself and the athletes I was with more and more. It's something I think about a lot as a reporter, reading and covering some of these stories that are taking place in sport now, where I know it's quite a scene in Canada in terms of athletes speaking out about perceived abuses in their high performance careers, right? In gymnastics. Artistic swimming is also one where this has happened. Bobsled recently, I'm trying to think of them all. You know, and there are some things about sport that are a high performance sport, elite sport, that are inherently unhealthy. And Canada's probably better than a lot of countries too, in terms of what we accept. And I think athletes need to be listened to more and treated more like athletes and not like adults and as peers and experts within their own sport, because it's themselves than they have been. And certainly, I'm not saying anything about my past, or I had great coaches, great support and everything, but it is a milieu at the top, and when you're pushing really hard, that can be mentally and physically really unhealthy, right? You really, and there, I think there are some points where I probably should have stepped back. I probably shouldn't have trained. I probably shouldn't have, you know, I probably should have gone to a doctor. I probably should have done a lot of things. I think I just would have taken better care of my own health, mental and physical, had I it all to do over again.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's so many reasons why that becomes the cultural norm. And I don't think that it necessarily even became all the cultural norm out of what's the word I'm looking for, on purpose, you know, that it's sort of an accidental coincidence in some degree. You have athletes that are so desperate to succeed. Again, like we said before, it's so connected to their worth that you become so worried that one bad performance or one bad day or one missed practice is going to mean the end of your career. And you so desperately want this goal or multiple goals that you have. So that puts people in these positions. And I think the one area where the evolution of sport has gotten a lot better is, for instance, in the NCCP coaching, there's a lot more about, so much of it isn't about the technical aspect. It's about training people on what's appropriate as a coach, because so many of us have seen so many things that were inappropriate through our lives. So training people on what is appropriate behavior, how to treat people appropriately in that position. And I guess the other area is that the coaching position used to be such a position of power. It used to be such a position of only what the coach says goes. They had so much power.
Used to. Is that not
I'm not saying not the case now.
Yeah.
But I think you have some very high profile cases where it's changed careers, not to throw Mike Babcock under the bus.
Sure. Yeah.
Things like that happen. And that's probably a wake up call. Like, oh, like what he did to one particular athlete wasn't a physical aggression or anything like that. But what he did was so horrific as a coach and just destroying the whole position of trust in a relationship, which is what the coach athlete relationship's all about. So it definitely still occurs. I think there's definitely some cultural issues, but I think that it is at least leaning towards growth in that area, that this isn't how we should treat athletes, that you need to treat them better, that it needs to be culturally normal. And then you have things like, like you have safe sport, and these become like a mandatory part of all sporting organizations, that they have a way to contact people outside of the organization to talk about these things that have happened. And then the athletes that have had so many of these horrific things occur to them, that they are brave enough, which is fantastic for everyone. Like all of us get the benefit of that, whether that's parents or former athletes or whatever. When you have these athletes come out and say, like, this happened to me, that's really important. And I can only imagine how hard it would have been for many of them, including the former Chicago Blackhawks player. Like those kinds of stories are like very powerful.
Yeah. It makes me think though, Josh, like I've covered also out here the story with the former coach who was with the Whitecaps women's team and with Canadian national women's team, both the Olympic team in 2008 and the under-20 World Cup team, who's now pleaded guilty to 4 sex assault charges and is awaiting sentencing. This is in relation to 4 former soccer players. It's just a story that's prominent out here, and some other ones. And I think coaches and I think administrators in sport, in high performance sport, have to think more about the athlete and the whole person and the athlete. I think a lot of these situations arise because coaches it's in such this power position, especially in elite teams where they're the ones deciding who gets on and who gets off. They are the ones sort of setting the tone for the team. And for this one coach in particular, like they let him go in 2008 and he started coaching girls within 2 months again. And the administrators at Soccer Canada and the Whitecaps, they had some inkling of what was going on, but they didn't do anything to stop this person from getting another job almost right away. And it makes me think, and there's a bunch of scenarios. The ones in artistic swimming are not that horrific, but also similar in terms of there was abuses. And then when push comes to shove, the administrators align with the coach and the athletes are left by themselves, and they're in a vulnerable position because if they speak out or make any waves, then they're off the team, right? They're not going to be seen favorably. And so and even their parents are like that. They're weighing, how do you bring these issues forward without, jeopardizing your future in this sport that you've invested you and your family have invested so much in. And I think that's the scenario that repeats itself over and over again in Canadian sport to greater and lesser degrees. The example I gave you is a terrible one, obviously, but you saw that at Bobsleigh Canada too, with the thing that's going on there. When it's the athletes having to figure out how to navigate this system, that even though they are at the center of the system, they have no way to sort of advocate for themselves without often being punished because it's, So I think safe sport is a great idea. It really needs to be a third party. It needs to be independent, and you can't have sports orgs investigating themselves.
Right.
We just can't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so prevalent. And then the other issue with it is that one person can have such an impact on so many people's lives too. So it just, this one person who's put in that position, and they get it, just like the gentleman that was with the Chicago Blackhawks. He started working for the national hockey program, like the national team, and then he's working, and you're going like, how does this person get opportunity? That's the one that blows me away, is so many of these people that are clearly terrible people doing horrific things. There's lots of people that love coaching. So why are we giving opportunities to these people that we know are literally committing crimes? And then what the impact of this, like how many people did they affect? We don't even know. And you look at what it does to the careers, like Fleury, right? Theo Fleury. Like you look at what it did to his career and came out, and he was a person that was fortunate enough, I guess, in a sense that it didn't affect his contractual position with teams, where so many times when people do come out, they literally do get stuffed to the side and and they sort of disappear. Fleury was such a great player that they didn't do that to him, fortunately for him, and it's great that he told that story. But
but Theo Fleury, he was the victim of Graham James, right? And Swift Current.
One of many people.
Sheldon Kennedy as well, and there's another guy, Greg Galulu, who has become an advocate for safe sport as well.
Right.
I mean, it's incredible, but those men have had really hard times in their lives, right?
Right.
And the world's a different place now. Victims, we hear from more victims. I think we have language to speak about those things, whereas in the past, there wasn't, and it was, no one it was all very hush hush all the time, right?
Right.
Like I think about my own kids who are in their early 20s, but they can talk about stuff. I don't think I could at that age. I don't think I knew the words or knew how to sort of characterize those sorts of things. It was all very kept quiet all the time, right?
Right, and it was never spoken about openly.
Yes.
And it sort of goes to that victim blaming situation. The victims blame themselves and other people blame the victims. How did they put themselves in this situation? Well, it's a 16-year-old kid or a 15-year-old kid and a 35-year-old adult. That's the person in the wrong, but they feel that way, and then they're so worried, so they stay in these situations longer because of that passion for this place they want to get to.
And those sexual abuse cases too, it's often as you said, and these I remember asking someone who was involved in the coaching certification in Canada, is it written anywhere that coaches shouldn't have personal relationships with their athlete? But apparently it wasn't. I think it is now. I think there's but again, that whole thing about not being able to talk about, or not having the vocabulary to talk about, or not being open enough to talk about these things, right? So everything was always kept hush hush. I think we have to just speak very plainly about what the expectations are, especially when you're talking about coaches and the power that they can have and the power position they're in over athletes, young athletes.
Right. Yeah. There's not only specifics on that, but there's the rule of two now, where it's like there should be two people in the room at any one time. So you're not putting people in those kinds of positions. Those are really, I guess those are the areas where you see that it's mandated growth in a way that at minimum makes it more difficult for people to commit these crimes without a witness. It at least it's forcing, this is the standard that you have to keep to continue to operate. So I think that's the one area where the growth in that area is inevitable. People have a voice. And while social media is not necessarily always the blessing, sometimes it's a curse, but it does provide a microphone to people, no matter your background, that when people do speak out, they do have a platform that they can speak out on, because in other ways, if somebody of significance doesn't hear of a story, then nobody's hearing them speak. And so I guess that's one benefit of social media in this era, is that while often it's not always used for the greater good, it does give a microphone, or whatever you want to say, to people when they do have something important to say. I guess the next thing I was interested in is what was there? Was there a passion immediately? Like you were talking about that difficult transition time of going from one sporting life to the other sporting life. Was that something you sort of stumbled into, or found, or felt driven towards, that you wanted to do that?
To get into journalism and my second, So I did have a notion that I wanted to stay in sport, but I didn't want to coach. I had a vague notion I'd like to be a sports writer, because I had met one here who wrote for the Vancouver Sun. Her name is Wendy Long, who was just a great sports journalist, covered the Lions beat, covered everything. And I'd met her because she had done a story, and I had been interviewed for it. And it sort of started a little bit of a friendship. And so that sort of crystallized in my head that maybe I could, you know, there weren't a lot of female sports reporters back in 1988. Wendy was one of the very few, and she was excellent. And she also had a real interest in women's sport, female sport. And, you know, when she could, she would report on it. And it was a very rare thing to see female sport covered in your daily paper and on the electronic media as well. And so that yeah, it sort of sparked my imagination a little bit. And then I networked as much as I could when I got out of sport, and I got a weekend job at CBC in Vancouver as a researcher, which meant pretty much I had to order everyone's dinner and get the order right, and then make sure it was delivered after it arrived, you know, at the building on the weekends. And yeah, and I got to learn actually the job, the TV sports reporting job from the ground up, because I got that sort of foot in the door job. And then, you know, once I didn't really know what I didn't know anything. I took some broadcasting courses at BCIT, but I tell you, back then in the late 1980s, so my first job in TV was like in 1980, end of 1988, I started. It's just really exciting. It's super exciting. Like there's deadlines, there's crazy stuff going on all the time. It's, you know, it's pretty high profile as well. And I walked and got a job at the sports office with just a bunch of great guys who were super supportive and very helpful and patient, and, you know, kind of willing to hold my hand and teach me the business. And so it was a real lucky sort of blessing for me. Yeah. And then because it was CBC, it made sense that I would sort of stay on there and try and push, because I wanted to do more Olympics too. I have that Olympic thing. I was always intrigued by that. You know, it sort of drove my athletic career, and it sort of drove my broadcasting career as well.
Right. Yeah. It's like a funny love affair that many of us often have. And it's such iconic moments that have happened that you see. And some of those just sear so deeply into your childhood or different times of your life. Yeah. It's amazing. Like I will never forget Donovan Bailey's Olympic gold medal run. That's one of those moments to me. Like I remember when that happened in my hometown of maybe it's 3,000 people at the time. Everyone just on the street opening their doors and just yelling. Like just people were so excited. It was like New Year's Eve, banging pots, you know, like everyone's watching it. You've never watched the 100-meter before. I don't care. I'm watching this race. And in his particular case, we had this stunning upset, beautiful, then horrific moment for Canada with Ben Johnson in 88. So to see that come back in 96 and someone win it and they didn't lose the medal later and set the world record record when he did it was like so amazing. And the other part that I could see that makes a lot of sense is there's something about the roller coaster ride that is life, but especially athletics, is those high points are so brief, and it's such a hit to your body. And then these low moments are so long, they feel like eternity. And then you get one of those high moments and it feels so deserved, right? They feel so good. Those long plateaus or valleys make those peaks feel like Mount Everest every time. So I could see how when you get into the world of broadcasting and there's like, oh, there's this deadline, this thing I have to do. And, oh, maybe I have to be on air in 5 minutes unexpectedly for some trade or whatever that just came up. It's like, it's, you know, it's such a high moment. Or, you know, we got to call the first ever medal by a Canadian woman in judo. Yeah. And so to feel like you're a little tiny piece of that is amazing. Like I never shrink.
It's a total rush, right?
Total rush. Yeah. So we're sort of like rush junkies. And so going into as athletes, right? And then to go into that, for me, I feel that same rush when I'm in the chair coaching at a tournament. When I see one of the athletes that I've worked with for 10 years and they win a medal at the national championships, you feel this personal pride, but you also feel this high for this person that you've known so long. That gives me that same, it's the same fix. And then if I'm coaching 5 athletes, it's even more so. You have these highs and lows in the same day. You feel so bad because someone underperformed. You feel so great that someone did perform. Of course, yeah. And so in broadcasting and reporting, I can only imagine be the same kind of idea.
Yeah, it's probably not that personal as what you've just described. Like, how do you deal with that? Right. You know, that whole thing about life and keeping an even keel. People say it in broadcasting all the time. Don't get too high. Don't get too low. You know, that sort of idea of emotional management or
Right.
arousal management, or
Right.
which is probably good for sanity, but it is
Right.
nice to be able to enjoy the good moments, right?
Yeah, it's a great concept.
Yeah.
One of my favorite is the Man in the Arena speech by Teddy Roosevelt. And he says his point is, you never want to live in that gray middle. Life is about passionately chasing things. It's not whether you're successful or not. It's the sweat and the passion and the time you put into it. It's being marred with the dirt and blood, that you work for. That's what makes life worth living, not living in this gray area where every day is monotonous. I'm not sure I necessarily agree. I think it's really personal dependent what people find, but
it's in the effort, it's in the trying. So if I were a Pierre de Coubertin expert like Scott Russell, our colleague, who knows, and that's pretty much the foundation of the Olympics, actually, even though there's medals and we all focus on that. It is, and I can't remember the quote, but for de Coubertin, it was to try, right? It was to participate. It was to be a part of this. It was to join in and give it your best shot, and see how much you could achieve, within the crucibles of the Olympics or the sport. But it was in the trying and the effort where the nobility is found.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing that I love that I'm sure you must helps keeps you passionate and engaged in your job is the one thing that I always find is if you meet an Olympic athlete or you talk to an Olympic athlete or a national competitor of anyone, it doesn't matter who they are. Every story is so unique. And that I find I love. It's the same with like musical arts. Anyone that succeeds, it doesn't matter who you are. Everyone's story has a unique layer to it that's very interesting. So another colleague of ours, that was the Beijing Olympic champion. She commentated again. My brain is going off the rails.
What sport?
Pardon me?
What sport?
Wrestling. You called her Olympic gold medal.
Carol Wynn.
Yeah, Carol Wynn. Yeah, it's like every one of these stories that you hear of people being highly successful or pushing for those high levels of success. Every story is so unique and so magnetic. Like it's just so incredible. So that's one thing that I think I really appreciate when you hear these stories, and I'm a big baseball fan. So you hear the story of Bo Bichette that's so different than the story of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. that's so different from Jose Bautista. And everyone is like this incredible. Kevin Gausman has a really interesting one where he became obsessed with pitching his split finger fastball, I think. So he took video of this one guy that threw it that he loved. He inverted it so it made this left-hander look like a righty. He obsessively watched the video until he could throw it exactly like that guy threw the ball. Like that's how he became a really great pitcher. It's like, there's something they did mechanically to be great, or they came from a place of struggle, or they came from, like Patrick Marleau's hometown's like 50 people. Yeah. It's just, I find every story can be really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what makes sports. So as a sports reporter, like getting to tell stories, you are so right about that. It's such a rich storytelling milieu. And again, I know I mentioned sort of the, take the little crucible, and it's within the parameters of sometimes as simple as you win, you lose, right? You have failure, success, whatever, but there's so much other stuff going on, right? For these people to have these stories and to get where they, get to a point where they have profile and everyone has a story. Everyone has a story.
Right. Yeah. And if you watch basketball, I remember watching the Raptors when Del Curry was on the team. He was this incredible shooter, and Steph Curry would be in the pregame shooting when he was 8 and 9 years old. And now he's the best 3-point shooter in the history of the NBA by far. And so as a Toronto fan, you also feel like, people often refer to a team as we, it's like you feel this connection to that individual, because I went to Raptors games where he was a little boy shooting before the game started. And now I see one of the best players that's ever lived. And I remember seeing him it almost feels like you're part of it in some funny way. I don't know why that is. I don't know, but it's such a cool feeling.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The Del Curry, Steph Curry one, nature and nurture. Although he has a brother who's also successful, right? But he's not Steph. Carol Wynn's story, her parents were boat people, and they were sponsored to come to Canada to a little church in New Hazelton. That's where they ended up after being in a refugee camp for 4 years, I think. I think I can't remember what she said her dad's job, but there was like 4 kids, tiny little town, probably smaller than the one you grew up in, New Hazelton, but there was a wrestling coach at the high school. And that little town produced a lot of really good national level wrestlers and a lot of females, because it was an opportunity for, sports minded girls or were interested in competing and being sort of physical expression, I guess, to do a sport. And that was the sport they did. And they became really good. And it wasn't the most high profile coach. He was just like the guy you talked about who started your club in your hometown, right? And yeah, it's an amazing story. I interviewed Clara Hughes when she won her first bronze medal in Atlanta. That was one of my assignments I think it was in the road race, or was it the time trial? Anyway, and that was in 1996. And I was a sideline reporter on women's cycling that day. And then in 2006 in Trino, I was a sideline reporter when she won her gold medal. In a different sport, right? It's cycling 10 years earlier, and 10 years later, there I am on the sidelines, interviewing her about her
at a Winter Games, right?
At a Winter Olympics, yeah.
Like
also,
not only at Olympics, but the other Olympics. In a
just an
sport.
incredible story. But there's someone who had a kind of a troubled childhood as well, drug taking and all sorts, just bad crowd. Maybe it wasn't so horrific. Maybe it's sort of normal stuff that kids do in Canada.
Right.
But also a really interesting story, right?
It's awesome. I can just, and every time, I always do that. It's like I don't watch nearly as much sports as I'd like, just the time frame which I often work, but I often read. I love to read about sports, so I'll read the articles on athletes and how they got to that place, and I find it so fascinating to connect and learn about what drove them and where they came from and their background. Like that, that's really exciting to me. So I'm super, what's the word I want to say? Appreciative of all the time that you gave me today. And it was great to reconnect and get to chat again. So thank you very much for that. And hopefully I did an all right job in your role today as the reporter / interviewer, but thank you again for the time. And I hope we connect again soon.
It was just tremendous. Thanks for the invitation, Josh. It was great talking with you.
Thank you.